And I think we are good to go. What's up, YouTube? How's it going, everybody? My name's Colin. I'm with Predictable Revenue, as you can tell, because you're hanging out on our channel. Today, I'm joined by Alice and Pete. Alice is one of our SDRs. She works on, I guess I can't say the name of the project because we haven't finished the case study with them, but we got a case study coming out soon, and it's all been Alice's super hard work. Yeah, she's doing a great job there. And then Pete, one of our account execs, but started his life here at Predictable Revenue as an SDR. Yeah, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Today we're talking about discovery calls, and we're going to go through and actually work on some messaging with you. We're going to look at what are the questions that you're asking to open up the discovery calls. We've got a couple things that we're going to share that if you were doing these on your discovery calls, you are absolutely killing your pipeline. So stay tuned for there. There's a nice little cliffhanger for you. But why don't I open the floor to Alice and Pete? Alice, why don't you say hello? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the sort of role that you're working in, just to provide context to the people hanging out.
Hi everyone. So my name is Alice. I work as an SDR, so a sales development rep. And well, basically, I work for the large enterprise industries. That's like kind of like my sector, and running on 1 year at PR, and a lot of learning to do as well.
Nice. You got your headphones recently, didn't you?
I did. Thank you
Nice.
for that.
No
You're awesome.
problem. That's how I remember if people have made it past the year. I'm like, do I remember making the purchase for those headphones or talking to somebody about the purchase of those headphones? And Pete, why don't you say hello?
Hey everybody, as Colin mentioned, I am Pete. I've been working here for about 3 years, a little over now, and I started as an outbound SDR, so I've got a little bit of that perspective as well, although I'm sure Alice is a much better SDR than I ever was. And then I've moved into the account executive role for nearly 2 years now. So for the sake of today's and my perspective, I'll mostly be sharing the perspective of an account executive.
Right on. Thanks, Pete. And I just want to say hey to some of the regulars, Kimberly and Harsh and Anita and Sandra. And I'm sure there's a few others in there. I can't see you in chat yet, but why don't you jump in, say hello, and just let me know. What is your favorite, what's your go-to discovery call opener? How do you open up your discovery calls? Are you like how's it going and spend some time on the sort of personal side? Are you diving right into the pain? Like, this is what I saw, or this is what I've heard. This is, the reason of the call. Do you set the agenda, or is it more, oh, what's up, Lydia? Good to see you. Are you an agenda first, or are you a little bit more casual and just start with the small talk? And can you guess what I generally start with? So with that said, yeah, let me know. Hey, Shauna, Kimberly, definitely personal side first. Very cool. So where do you guys want to start today? Like, we could start at the top of the call. Do you want to start with like the call prep? I know we've kind of covered this before, being that this is a recurring segment, but why don't we start with like, yeah, I guess just one quick thing. What's your favorite, Alice, before you jump on a discovery call, what's the one thing that you always check?
So I think my number one thing I would check are my records. Have I contacted this person before? Have I talked to them before on the phone or sent any email? And if my software allows for it, which it does, have they checked or clicked my emails? So that would be number one. Then I would go right into their LinkedIn and check if the title is right, the one that I have down in my records. Um, if they have job descriptions or about in their section, so that I can know like more or less who am I talking with.
Very cool. And we'll get to Pete in a sec, but I just want to add some context because I know you're working sort of larger accounts. And I know with those larger accounts, they're typically a heavier sales process. And when you look at SDRs, you can see, like some of them with this, and it's not going to be like this for every organization, but I think the trend that I've seen is that smaller deal sizes, shorter calls for the SDRs, larger deal sizes, longer calls for the SDRs. Does that map to your experience?
I think it does because yeah, it's such a longer sales process. So you have to build trust really slow, and yes, because it is so big. I think it's most important to like be very educated on what they need exactly, and how you are very different. So I think that, yeah.
Cool. And are you a personal opener first, or you like set the agenda, let's get to it?
I always set the agenda because of the ICP of the people I call. They are often like very fast paced, get to the point people. So I always go straight into the point.
That's fair. And I guess these are outbound calls, right? Like this is your first time talking to them. So there's probably a little bit less wiggle room for something like that, or less interest. They're a little bit more like, let's get to the point.
Yeah.
Cool. So Pete, how about yourself? Are you set the agenda guy, or are you leading with the personal stuff, talking, about your favorite hockey team, the Toronto Maple Leafs?
No, definitely not that. I always try to lead with something personal, like build a bit of rapport and trust before you get into like the nitty gritty. But you kind of have to read the room. Like usually I start with like how's it going? How's the day? Or how's the week? And if it's just like a short, good, I think it's time to move on because they're not interested in the chit chat. But sometimes you get people who really want to open up about where they live, where they're from, or yeah, if they've got like a sports team on their hat or something like that. I had a good example of that was when we went to Boston for a conference when I was an STR. Our account executive at the time, as like a thank you for always booking in meetings and all that stuff, he bought me a Red Sox hat, which was really cool. And I know nothing about baseball or Red Sox, but I started wearing the hat on sales calls. And Red Sox turn out to just be a polarizing team. So almost always people would either respond positively, or they'd be like, "Oh, boo the Red Sox," and I'd be like, "Totally, man." Even though I have a hat, I just don't know anything about the team. So always I try to build a little bit of trust and like friendship early on. But I think to Alice's point, if you get someone who's just wants to get going and get to it, then no need to force that sort of down their throats. Just get to it.
It's funny. And Pete's not exaggerating. The majority of his calls as an AE, when he was wearing that hat, everybody would call him out on it. And not call him out, but like it would come up. Like if they knew baseball, if they knew sports, they're like, "Oh, so you're a Sox fan." And I used to sit, I don't know, a couple desks away from Pete, and I'd hear him like, "Oh yeah, no," and then I'd hear the Jason story for the 8,000th time. I'm like mouthing it to myself. I'm like telling the story along with Pete. It was hilarious. Although I'm sure you did the same every time you heard me ask for a credit card on the first call, just like face palm.
Every salesperson usually develops a crutch or two that a line that worked once and they just stick with it the rest of the way.
Yeah, I always have we're obviously in Zoom now. I'm hiding the participants, but I'll show say hi to Mero's cute dog for a second there. Love it. But it's not showing up on this Zoom. But if I'm on my Mac, I've got like an old picture of me playing guitar, and that's what always, if I start with my camera off, that's what always pops up, and it's an instant conversation starter to like get the conversation flowing. They're like, "Oh, if they know guitar, like what kind of guitar is that?" I should really just like Photoshop it. So I'm wearing a Boston Red Sox hat, I'm playing a guitar, and I don't know, like at the Eiffel Tower or something like that. So you just got like 10 different things that somebody could pick up on that's like most relevant to them. And then like, "Oh, I saw you were at the Eiffel Tower." And be like, "That's what you noticed? All right, let's double down on that."
Nice. You're going to end up in a Dos Equis commercial in no time. It's the most interesting man in the world.
Totally. The most interesting Zoom photo when my video isn't showing. Yeah. Anita, what's up, Anita? She's saying, read the room. Yeah. If one of natural disasters has touched the location, check in on their safety. Example, California's on fire, or Mexico had really great kite surfing last week, as Bernard would say. Yeah.
Gotta see the bright side.
Man, some of the storms I've seen my kite surfing friends crawl out into, I'm like, I'm going to be home under the covers. And they're like, "I'm going to go and jump on the water." It's crazy. So Pete, what's the one thing, I know you're taking generally meetings coming in, and it's from like an SDR has booked that for you. So they've had one of, like Alice has already booked a call. What's the one thing that you're researching ahead of time before you jump on the call? And before you answer that, chat, let me know, what's the one thing that you're looking at before you jump on the call? Are you reviewing your CRM records? Are you looking for something personal to sort of facilitate that like early conversation? Are you looking for shared connections? Let me know what you're doing. So Pete, what are you doing there?
I think first and foremost would be to check like the notes that the SDRs made. Like obviously I'm coming into a conversation that's already live from the prospect's perspective. Like they've had a conversation, they're mid process of being familiarizing themselves with predictable revenue. So it's really important to look at all the context I can from an SDR who's already maybe been working them for months and months. So there's lots of valuable insights there. A really key piece obviously is which SDR did it come from? Because if it's an inbound opportunity, pardon me, versus an outbound, you're likely tackling it quite a bit differently. So I'd say the CRM is my sort of first stop for everything. But one place that I'll always check if it's not in the CRM is LinkedIn to get a sense of the, I guess, the job title. Like, who am I speaking with? Is it an influencer? Is it an ultimate decision maker? Because that's going to shape how you approach the call. So I'd say that's a really important piece to supplement the CRM record with.
Nice. I like where chat's going. Sandra's looking at CRM, LinkedIn, where they live. I'm assuming Sandra for that personal, building that personal connection. And then Shauna is saying LinkedIn as well. The platform their website is built with. I'm assuming that's relevant to the conversation. Do they have Google Analytics installed? Are they showing up in search? What is the company posting on social? Do you think Shauna is selling like SEO services based on that? And so if we move into the call mentally, and I'm just going to mention to chat, we've got a bunch of sort of openers and some qualification questions and some objections that people have sent, like people that were on the list had responded to and said, hey, can you help us with these? So if you've got an objection that you're struggling, that you hear often and you're struggling to overcome, throw it in chat and we'll put it in our slides for a little bit later. And then we'll all work collectively on here's how we would overcome that. And so what would be helpful if you want to do that is sort of here's the objection, here's a little bit like, here's the industry we're in, the product that we're selling. Like for Shauna, she's selling digital marketing. So it's like digital marketing, here's the objection. Here's the context of maybe the customer. So digital marketing to vegan pet stores, if that's a thing. Cool. So talk to us about, Alice, I know you're generally starting with like a cold conversation. And so I find it's a bit of a balance. You can't jump right into the questions. And so what's your strategy for handling these initial calls and like really, I don't know, igniting, creating a little bit of like momentum? Because it definitely, and I'm sure I said this last time, it feels like you're pushing a big rock up a hill. And if you stop pushing just a little bit, it's going to roll backwards and the call's over, right? So it's such a delicate balance and it's so easy to lose the customer's interest. So how do you handle that?
So first I always open with, I present myself real fast and say, how are you? Have I caught you in the middle of something? I feel like asking how are you, but not leaving the pause is like being mindful that they kind of know that I don't care how they are. I mean, I do care, but they feel like I don't.
Straight up
So
cold, Alice.
no, I do care,
You should
but
just go with like, hey, how are you? Just kidding. I don't really care about that. I just wanted to get some, just get some time on your calendar.
that would definitely differentiate myself.
Yeah.
And then like just going into, have I caught you in the middle of something, which is a no oriented question. So then after I hear, no, go ahead. I always mention where I found them, so that they don't feel that this is telemarketing. Um, I always share a little bit about what I found in their LinkedIn profile. So for example, I saw that you've been in the industry for more than 25 years, and just like mention a thing or two that I saw and say why I decided to reach out or why I think what I'm going to be talking about might be interesting to them. And after that, just go ahead and mention. So I asking if my name or the company rings a bell, then if he or she is the same person that I have in my record. So that would look something like, um, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you the manager of this and that? And then they can start like talking a little bit, and then just go ahead and ask if it's under your wheelhouse, whatever I'm trying to pitch for. So kind of going into a personal detail a little bit on the LinkedIn, but more on the why this is relevant or why I think this is important.
Cool. And on the flip side, Pete, I know you're sort of down the stream a little bit. Yeah, I'm curious how you handle that, the initial part of your discovery calls.
Yeah, I think it is similar to what you mentioned. Like, you've got to build some momentum, and a lot of that, how easy it is to do so sort of depends on whether it's an inbound or outbound opportunity. Since we're the outbound success company, let's pretend it's an outbound deal. Um, to Alice's point, you've got to build some credibility and add some value while still getting out your qualification questions. So one of my favorite ways to do that is obviously lead with your qualifying questions. Like, for me, I'm trying to get a lay of the land. Like, how are they building business today? And based on that, I can share little tidbits of success stories that sort of tease them, that keep them, so they can see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel of all my discovery questions. So, and a good example of that maybe would be if someone says, yes, we're in founder-led sales and we're just looking to get started with outbound. I might say, we've helped a lot of companies in founder-led sales. That's a really common use case for us. And then lead into my next question. So even though I haven't really given them like what they're looking for in terms of solutions and case studies and things like that, they at least see, okay, these guys have done this before. I'm going to stick out the rest of these discovery questions and let Pete get through all his questions. Pardon me.
That's super helpful. I love that it's almost like a bit of a tease. It's sort of like what we did at the beginning of the episode. Like, hey, there's a couple things that really screw up your discovery calls. We're going to talk about them at like the 25-minute mark just to make sure that you stick around. And speaking of teases, we're doing a super stream first week of November. Segues are fun. I'm pretty good at them, aren't I? I'm not going to tell you what's in there, but we're basically optimizing for, I love going to conferences, but I hate sitting through talks at conferences. And to me, the best part of every conference is that moment after the speaker walks off the stage and is surrounded by a group of people that are super interested in what they were talking about. And that's the atmosphere that we're trying to create for the super stream, whatever you want to call it. Mini Own Your Growth. No, I'm not going to abbreviate that. So that's what we're trying to create. It's going to be a similar format to what we're doing today, but we're going to bring in a couple of guests, and then we've got some pretty awesome people lined up. And our goal is to give you the opportunity to sort of pick their brain, to bring the things that you're working on in outbound sales development, and closing, and get the perspective of experts. And we're trying to facilitate somewhat of a one-on-one conversation. Yeah, I mean, as much as we can with, a couple hundred people on YouTube, but we really want to facilitate that. We're sharing, we're learning from each other, and we're really giving you a chance to, we have a big network of sales leaders. And I know that was one thing that I didn't have when I first started this company, and I would have loved to have been able to pick, the brains of somebody that was a VP of sales at, say, HubSpot or Salesforce or Slack. And so we have that network, and we're trying to bring that to you. And so I'm curious, chat, just let me know. Like, what do you want to see on that? Who should we want, or who should we bring, and what kind of help are you looking for something like that? I don't know if that's too sort of high level, but yeah, I totally forgot where I was segueing to. I feel like Pete was talking, and then I was like, oh, I've got this clever idea for a segue, and then I feel like I was going to throw it to Alice for something, but I'm totally drawing a blank on where we were going. Because we were talking about sort of that earn the right. Pete was talking about outbound, and basically you're going to listen to me talk through the sort of outline of where we're at, because apparently I'm afraid of silence. But like, we were talking about that sort of that motivation and the teasers. There we are. And so, Alice, I'm curious. Like, I love the way that Pete is sort of teasing things at the beginning of his call, and I can't remember the name for them, but it's basically you're creating these like open loops of like, I'm going to give you one sneaker, but not the other. I'm going to give you a car, but not the remote. I'm going to give you one AirPod, but not the other, so that you're sitting there waiting. And like, if you've watched TV, if you watch reality TV or like, I don't know, any TV, any YouTube videos, they do this. So I'm wondering, is this an element of your phone call, of like how you handle calls at all? And then we'll go to Pete, and maybe you can give us you can each share some examples. And then chat, while they're coming up with their answers, let me know, what open loops do you create in your sales calls? And do you know what I mean by open loops, or should we talk a little bit about more about that? Let me know in chat, and I'll pass it to Alice.
So I think when you start outlining a little bit about the problem you want to talk about, when you ask, is this and that under your wheelhouse? And they, that's kind of like a foreshadowing of what you're going to say you solve. So it's in their heads. If you're saying, I don't know, operations optimization, they're gonna know, okay, this person is gonna solve me for operations optimization. So one of the way to open that loop would be to ask, for example, if you saw anything about the company. uh, I don't know. So I saw that you like there's gonna be challenges. No, for example, this company is hiring 100 people, and they're like increasing their workforce. You can say something like, "I saw that you are increasing your workforce. So what kind of challenges are you anticipating in this and that?" And based on the answer of that, um, it's kind of like a given that you're gonna be touching on those challenges.
Awesome. And so, Pete, talk to me about, you gave me sort of one example of like, oh, we've worked with, founder-led sales before. That's pretty common, but then you don't share the story. So one, are there any other open loops that you try and sort of create? And then two, yeah, tell me how you sort of satisfy that, or how you close the loop later on in the conversation.
Yeah, I think ultimately you want to sort of tease customer success stories. And the way you close the loop is when you're done your discovery, you circle back and share that customer success story a little bit more in depth. So another example might be if someone, it's really common for us, clients come to us and they've had a bad experience with an outbound vendor in the past. And they say, oh, we're skeptical of using an outbound partner because we had a terrible experience. And in all honesty, I hear that all the time, and I'll be candid about that, where I'll say the majority of our customers are in the same boat where they had a really bad experience. So I totally get where you're coming from. And so, again, it establishes that credibility, it establishes some appreciation and honesty. And then eventually when I want to circle back and I've got all the context I need, I might lead my sort of first glimpse at a pitch by saying, I mentioned that company, or I mentioned how a lot of our clients have had bad experiences before. There was one in particular that used a cold calling agency that was calling people on their do not contact list. They were calling the wrong types of people. They had a terrible experience. Ultimately, they came to us for a more strategic, more focused approach, and we were able to deliver that for them. So throughout the whole sort of discovery, I've teased these little customer success stories. And then when it comes time to pitch, I can relay that in a little bit more detail and then let the client take over, or the prospect take over with some more questions from there.
That's pretty cool. I just want to say hey to Harsh, who was listening to music and saw that we were live and so jumped in. And then Wade, who looks like a prospect no-showed on him, and so he decided to come and hang out for the stream. Wade, I know you're there. So talk to me, so you've heard Pete's secret strategy here. I mean, I know you do the same. So tell me, give me an example of an open loop that you sort of create for your on your discovery calls, other than having one of the best voices at predictable revenue. Probably should be.
And the best laugh.
And the most infectious laugh. Yeah, if you heard this guy laugh, you can't like, it'd be better than antidepressants just listening to this guy laugh on a loop.
Colin, I will say that that poorly executed segue was a bit of an open loop earlier as well. But you closed it eventually. Just
I did.
Took a minute.
Open loop only because I forgot where I was going. But we'll get there. So as we sort of transition, and I want to get to some I guess engagement with chat here. So help me out. What open loops are you creating, or what objections? I guess what's the toughest objection in chat? What's the toughest objection that you've had recently? And you let us know, and we'll all work on a strategy. Even Wade, who's another one of our account execs, is fantastic at this. We'll all jump in and help you out. So let us know what's the toughest objection that you've encountered recently. Now, I'm curious, and we'll get to the open, or the toughest objections. I'm curious, like Alice, we talked about the balance, right? Of you pushing that big rock up a hill, you got to generate some momentum. So let's assume you've generated some momentum in the call, but now you've earned a little bit of momentum. You can kind of ask them a question. You can get them talking. And when I say momentum, what I'm thinking is like you've got to. I kind of feel and maybe it's just me. Chad, let me know if you feel this too when you're booking your meetings. But I feel in those that sort of first call, they're looking for something. They're looking for you to tell them, here's why we should be on this call. And they're looking for a little bit of, I don't know, it's a little more presenty than I like to be. A little bit more like you've got to kind of sell the next 3 minutes. And so you're a little bit on. But let's assume, so like, is that just me? Alice, do you feel that? And then from that, what is that sort of, what's the first question you go to once you've earned a little bit of that momentum?
I think my favorite question, if I am giving the opportunity to, would be to ask, in a way, make them picture how it would look like for them if they had the problem we solved for them. So for this, you would say, how do you think the result we give could improve your day-to-day life at work? And that way they start getting into this mindset of how better their day would be if this problem was solved. So that would be my go-to. Another one would be just to expand a little bit on their pain points and ask, so I saw that you're accountable for this and that. How do you deal with this problem? Often the problem we solve. And another one would be just we've been noticing that there's this current trend or challenge in the industry. How does your company or your group, or how would you deal with this? So just to expand a little bit more on their priorities or their pain points or their goals.
Perfect. And what about you, Pete?
I think typically because an SDR, by the time a meeting gets to me, an SDR has already done a really good job of getting information out of them and sort of enticing them to take that next call. I can afford the luxury of not being quite as direct as Alice, where I don't have to go right into, how would your life change? What I'm trying to do in my discovery, obviously I want to get to that question, but initially I want to paint like a really robust picture of where they're at today and where they're trying to get to, so that I can present the business case of that gap essentially. And that's where you touch on, more emotional things like how would your day and life change if we could solve that gap. But the first question for me is trying to get a lay of the land. So how do they generate new business today, and what are the pains and frictions that come with that? So, for example, if someone's relying entirely on an inbound funnel, even if it's a strong inbound funnel, they might say, well, it's really inconsistent and unpredictable. We want to hire a salesperson, but we don't know how many leads we're going to have next month. There's no way to tell. So that's an example of I've got a good understanding of where they're at today, what the pain point is, and then I can start to talk about, okay, how does your life change if we solve that for you? But for me, I want to get a really robust idea of what they're doing today. So the question might be as simple as, where does most new business come from today? And let them run with that.
Gotcha. And are you actually asking like, how would your life change? Or like, are you sort of dancing or like, are you going straight at and say, how would your life change if we did X, Y, Z?
I don't ask that every single time. I'm sort of trying to illustrate that and make them realize it without asking it directly. But sometimes when, customers, we start talking about expected output or expected value, if they give me kind of like a meh response, like I can't tell how they're feeling about it, I might say like, okay, how would like, would 10 meetings a month, for example, make a positive impact in your business? And that way I can feel them out to get a sense of, is 10 like not really what they're looking for? Like they need a lot more, in which case we talk about a different solution. Or is, 10 like a game changer for them where they can focus exclusively on sales, or, if it's a CEO, whatever. So if I can't really get the sense they're not giving me any indication of how it would impact them, then I'll go ahead and ask it directly. But hopefully I can get a sense out of their response that it's either a positive or sort of a meh solution for them, and dig in further from there.
Yeah, and I love the how questions. I love the like, how do you see this working at your company? And that's general. It's probably one of my favorite temperature checks if I'm lost. You know, you're on the call, you've asked some questions, they've asked some questions, and you just can't get a read. Maybe their video's off, so you can't see their face, you can't see their body posture. You can hear a bit from the voice, and you can kind of tell like, are they? I try and imagine, are they leaning in? Are they leaning back? Are they typing away and doing something else? Right? And you can kind of tell by how they're responding and how they respond to your questions compared to like how excited they were or unexcited they were at the beginning of the call. You can almost feel like the sort of energy levels. And I think the how question, it gets them out of the yes no, like especially if you get into like one of those like old school yes ladders or like, do you want 10 meetings a month? Yes. Do you think that would produce pipeline? Yes. Do you think that pipeline would turn into, yes. Like the old school, I can't remember. It's definitely not Getting to Yes. That was a negotiation book, but I remember this book I read in school that talked about the yes ladders. And like, I think they're generally, I like the idea of that you're building on top of their answers. So you're kind of moving the question or moving the conversation forward in one direction using the questions. But I really dislike the manipulative idea that by saying yes 5 times in a row, you're going to get them to trick them into saying yes a 6th time. I object to that whole idea. I love the how questions. I'm actually, one of my favorites was basically if I'm feeling like, hey, I've lost this prospect, I'll just call it out and be like, hey, it sounds like I've lost you, right? Like, is this not a good fit? Or if I don't think it's a good fit, I'm like, hey, I don't think it's a good fit, and here's why. This one took me a while to have the confidence to pull off on a call. It was, yeah, it was later in my career. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the calling them out like, hey, it sounds like this isn't a good fit, or how do you see this working? Alice, why don't we'll start with you, and then we'll go back to Pete, and then we'll go to chat because I see a bunch of objections and Dots. Good to see you again, Dots.
I think I have not yet had the courage to ask something like that. Like I feel like I lost you, but what I have did do. So one time, this person told me he was not interested, and I did tell him, well, it's not that you're not interested. Sorry, I'm just not interesting, probably. And it's like a little bit like just going into the resistance because that's the truth. It's not that they're not interested; it's that the salesperson is not interesting, and being interesting requires asking questions and being genuinely interesting. Um, yeah.
Cool. I encourage you, next time you feel like you're on a call and it's not going very good, calling it out. It's one of those, I know you've read Never Split the Difference. It's like a mini accusation audit. Hey, it sounds like there's nothing here, right? Are we wasting each other's time? Because the only positivity can come out of that, right? Like if you're on that call and say it isn't going well, but they're being polite, maybe they're Canadian, they're overly Canadian, and they're just like, oh yeah, this sounds interesting, that sounds nice, you sound smart, that's right, or not, that's right, you're right, oh yeah, you're right. You can kind of get like, you're only getting the top, I don't know, 4% of their brain paying attention, and they're probably doing something else. Calling it out, and not calling them out, but calling out like, hey, it sounds like there's nothing here. Like if you're on one of those calls and you're pretty confident it is one of those calls, what's your downside, right? The downside is, or like what I would think the downside is they say, yeah, you're right, there's nothing here, it's this and that, right? That opens up the conversation because they've either misunderstood you or there genuinely is no opportunity there because of XYZ, and it lets you learn that earlier in the call. Huge fan. And if they're not paying attention, it sort of like zaps them back into the conversation. And if they are, like say they are interested, but they were just like checking their email. They're like, oh no, sorry, I was just checking my email. Yes, this is something, or no, you're wrong about, this being a deal breaker for us. We're actually, and now they're coming towards you. It's one of those like great pivots. So next time a deal is tanking on you, and chat you too, but Alice, I'm going to follow up with you on this one. We'll talk about it, how it went next time we get you on stream. You're like, hey, it sounds like there's nothing here. Are we wasting each other's time? And chat, let me know, have you tried that? Or do you have a similar one that you like, that just took you some courage to build up to? and then we'll go to Pete and talk to us about that sort of, I guess how you would handle that situation.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever used that sort of exact line, but I am a really big fan of, I suppose, like the candidness that comes with being open and saying, hey, I'm not sure this is the best fit, or saying, hey, it seems like you don't think this is the best fit. Because I think a lot of prospects are so used to being sold, and like Colin, it's that kind of idea of the yes ladder. Like typically in a sales process, if they've got a salesperson who's sort of just doing everything it takes to sell them no matter what they're saying, that gets pretty tiresome. So I think having like the courage to just say, hey, candidly, like we're not a fit for every company, and I'm not sure this is the best fit. I'm trying to understand this piece or this piece. That usually gets client or prospects, pardon me, saying, um, okay, this guy's not just here to sell me, he's here to figure out a solution with me, and I want to be a part of that process. So you can almost do a temperature check there where, hey, I'm not sure this is the best fit, but I've got a few more questions to try to nail it in. And if they're keen on that, then you've got a good sense that they want to work together to a solution, or they might just say, yeah, I don't think it's a good fit either. And at that point, then, it's okay to move on, because you'd rather get to that no sooner rather than later.
Totally fair. We're going to get to some objections here, and good to see people throwing these here. And throw your objections in chat. Dot was asking, what are the best practices for sales or for follow-up voice calls? So we'll start with that, and then we'll jump into some objections, and then we've got some messaging coming up. But I have a favor to ask. I'm curious. I want everybody's opinion on what your favorite one is. Julia, who runs our marketing team, just sent me 4 different mock-ups for the SuperStream. And it's actually a photo. I think the photo is from the rooftop of our old office. And so I want you to let me know, because she asked my opinion, and I have no sense for design. So I got 50 people here. May as well get your take here. So I'm gonna drag it across here. Let me know. I might make that a bit bigger if we can. There we go. So this is number 2. So let me know what your favorite was. This is number 2. Come on, go to the next one, if I can. I can't go to the next one. I had like 4 queued up here. What happened? There we go. All right, let's try this again. So that's number 3. That's number 4. That's number 1. And that's number 2. Nice of me to put those in a good order. So let me know, what was your favorite? And the marketing team will thank you. So let's look at Dots. So Dots is asking best practices for follow-up calls. So, Pete, why don't we start with you? Because I think you're probably doing most of and Dots, maybe you can clarify before I throw it to Pete. Are you looking at, when you're saying follow-up calls, are you talking about follow-up cold calls where you've had that initial discovery call, but we didn't book anything, and so you're trying to reactivate the conversation? Or are you talking about the next step in a discovery, or like in a conversation? It's still an opportunity. You've got next steps. This is the sort of follow-up to that first conversation. You booked it on schedule. So let us know there. So let's start with Pete. What's your, let's assume it's the sort of, we're connecting from that first discovery call. What are the best practices? So like, where do you start? And how do you make sure you're sort of transitioning from last call to this call and then keeping that momentum alive?
Yeah, I'd say would love to get the clarification there from Dots, because that's what I was thinking as well. But the first step, I've, to be honest, rarely do like cold call follow-ups, because I make such a effort to book a follow-up call on my discovery call. So at the end of every single call, I'm trying to get a next step booked, even if it's, as desperate of an attempt as, hey, just let's put 5 minutes on the calendar just in case questions pop up. So we've got that time to make sure they don't go unanswered. So a really good way to lock in that follow-up call is by owning the process and showing to the prospect that how the sales process typically goes, and this is the best next step. So an example of that would be at the end of the call, say, great, I'm going to send you those proposals we talked about, send you some follow-up materials. Questions almost always pop up, so I think it's best that we put something in the calendar for next week to make sure we've got a time to ensure those questions don't go unanswered. So taking ownership of the process and sort of giving some direction to your prospect, most of the time they'll say yes to that. So that's a long-winded way of getting to the follow-up call. But once you get to the follow-up call, for me, it's really important that I set like a purpose of the call based off what I learned on the discovery call. What am I trying to uncover on the follow-up call? Is there pieces of qualification that I feel I've missed? Is there, I'm trying to understand the sales process or the buying process on their side, or am I trying to convince a new stakeholder to get involved? Like, set that purpose for yourself so that you can direct your questions accordingly. And then always lead with a summary of what happened on the last call and say, does that sound about right? So that's how I always go about things, like, hey, here's what I heard on the last call. You mentioned you're going to talk to your CEO about it. Does that sound about right? And how did that go? So that's my first question. But based off that sort of purpose I've set for myself, that'll lead how I ask subsequent questions from there.
I love that. I want to double click, and we'll go to Alice in a second because it's sort of a different context. But Pete, this is a bit of a leading question because I know how we handle this. But within your Salesforce, how do you keep track of what the next step is and when that next step is? So when you're looking at your pipeline, you have an idea of, here's where I'm at.
Yeah, we use a system called Medic. It's a modified version of MedPick, which I believe Jamie Buss told us about on the podcast she did with us.
Mm-hmm.
So it basically, Medic covers metric. So that's kind of the business case of why they'd work with us, like how much pipeline do they need? What are their growth goals? It's a number figure you can associate with why they'd work with us, essentially. E is for economic buyer, so making sure you at least know who that person is and hopefully have them in the process. There's decision process, there's decision criteria, there's identified pain, and there is champion, and then competition. So after the discovery call, I fill out that information and score it from 0 to 2. So 0 being I know nothing, 1 meaning I know a little bit, 2 meaning I've got it nailed. And prior to a follow-up call, one thing I like to do is look at those scores I've set for myself in each of those categories and understand where I'm missing information. So for example, if I've got a 0 in economic buyer and I'm going into another conversation with a potential champion, I need to zone in on who is the economic buyer, who's going to sign off on this, and why do they care, essentially, or what do they care about, so that I can make an appropriate pitch to them. So using that framework helps me go into a follow-up call and really easily assess what information am I missing that's going to help me close the deal, and those are sort of how I'll shape questions that I want to cover on the follow-up call.
I love that. I feel like you never lose your place. It's like you've got Google Maps, but for the sort of opportunity, which is something that I've never felt before until we had a system like this. And I really appreciate Jamie. Another piece that we also add in, that if you're not equipped to do a full medic, we just simply have next steps and next step date. And then when you're coming up and you're looking at your opportunity pipeline, so like literally your list of opportunities in Salesforce, you can configure that screen to say next step date and next step. These are obviously custom fields that you have to add. This is how I manage my pipeline. Pete might do it a little bit differently now, but I just had a view set up of all my ops. And so I could see, and I basically sorted by, here's what I'm doing next. And then I would just look at any of the ops that didn't have either a next step date, which was none because I was always perfect at it. Sometimes you can't lock it down, but then the next step, like that next action, if there wasn't anything, generally it was going to fall out of pipeline. So at least I had an idea that was coming. But if it was one of those where it's like, oh, wait on this, and they wouldn't commit on the call, then I'm writing that down in my next step text box so that when I'm at a glance looking, I very quickly, it's like my love letter to future Colin, because to try and jump into an op that you looked at 2 weeks ago and you haven't heard from them since, when you're working 30 or 40 other opportunities, it's going to take you 5 minutes to do the context switch and to figure out and remember, oh, that's right, here I was. Right. And so this is something that at the end of every call, if you're filling out that next step and then putting a date on it, and even if the next step is, hey, they wouldn't commit to a next step, but my next step is I'm going to send them a follow-up email, or I'm going to have a call with X, or I'm going to do Y. and then here's the context of, behind why I'm going to do that. You're going to save yourself so much time just in context switching. It's one of those little hacks that it took me a long, long time. And especially if you're building on what Pete says, which is you're booking the next steps at the end of every call. Like those two pieces, I mean, obviously the thing Pete said is way, way, way more important in terms of like from a pipeline perspective. But if you're looking at how do I make my life easier, if I'm following that good habit, having the next steps written and dated in Salesforce is going to make your remembering so much easier. It'll save you a ton of time. So Alice, let's ask. I want you to answer let's answer Dot's question a little bit differently. So let's assume you had a first discovery call, but you didn't, but you weren't able to book, say, a call with Pete. And before you answer that, so we're going to talk about like what are some best practices for those follow-up calls to reactivate them, get them on another call, and then book them with Pete. But I just need to defend my honor. People are saying I wasn't smiling in those photos. That's a smile. That's a huge smile right there. Pete and Alice can't see this, but you can look in Slack. I'd share my screen, but it just messes with the way we do this. It's a big smile. So it's me smiling. I'm like the happiest guy in the world right here. So, but thank you for the feedback on 1 and 2. So Alice, let's get back to the real stuff here. You had a discovery call, which, and I know this never happens, but you didn't book a meeting with your AE off that discovery call. Let's just pretend that it's happened once or twice before in that potential scenario that has obviously never happened before. What would you do?
So first of all, leave very good notes for myself. Mention everything. If they were rushed, why was the reason I couldn't book it? And then on the next call, I will mention the reason why I'm calling, who I am, and remind them a little bit of what we discussed in the last call. And go by it in like the same way, but mentioning what happened in the last call. I've had one time that happened, and the prospect actually did agree to the meeting, but he told me, but call me again. I don't know. He just asked me to call him again before we booked it. And I called him again and reminded him who I was. And he said, yeah. Okay, remind me like almost everything. So so they are very busy and they don't have a mind for salespeople that much. So you have to be very helpful and refreshing everything that may be relevant to them.
Yeah. My favorite cheeky move, I don't know if you can tell from my attitude on this, is I can be a little bit cheeky, and that definitely comes through whether I'm prospecting or when I'm on AE calls. If somebody says, call me back later, I'll hang up the phone and I would call them right back. Be like, and they're like, I said, call me later. I was like, you didn't define later. And this one is one of those, like, if it works, it'll work beautiful because they'll appreciate the sort of humor in it, or they'll be like, you're an ass. Like, don't call me again. So it's definitely a hit or miss. I don't think I would recommend that for everybody, because with your general, like, it's going to depend on your sense of humor and sort of where you are positionally in your role, who you're prospecting to. Like, some audiences are going to love that. Some audiences are not going to love that. I'm not sure if I would try that if I was prospecting into, say, big banks.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I was selling to, like, when I was doing that, I was selling to like entrepreneurs and like, small business owners. So I'm like, they're pretty casual. They like, that one worked pretty well actually. So Anita is getting the objection. I need it. This company needs it. Our clients need it, but I don't have control over that. So-and-so wants to use a different product, but it doesn't really work. So it sounds like Anita has the champion, but doesn't have the economic decision maker. Anita, is that a fair assessment here? And so let's go to Pete. So how would you handle this objection?
Yeah, I think ultimately when you have a champion, that's a huge potential benefit in the sales process. So if you have someone who's bought in and sees the value, then the next step you want to tackle with them is, okay, how do we get your company to adopt this? Again, it's a how question that incites some collaboration. And I always say, like, you'll often have a prospect who says, well, I got to sell this up up the food chain. And I'll offer the support of, hey, it's my full-time job to sell this. Why don't you socialize the idea with them, put me on a call, and I'll do the heavy lifting with them. So that way I get to instill myself in the process a little bit. I get the chance to communicate the value and hear potential objections directly from the economic decision maker. But I think having a champion is a great opportunity in your sales process, but you certainly can't count on them to close the deal for you. So lean on them and get them involved in the process to help you sell to the people who are putting up the objections internally.
I love that. What are your thoughts, Alice?
I love that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Anita, it definitely sounds like you, like I said, you don't have the economic decision maker on the call, and I love I love Pete's approach. If you try that and it doesn't work, so let's pretend that Pete's magical tactics don't work. They usually do, but let's pretend this one time they didn't work, and they're like, or let's just pretend they're resistant. They're like, oh no, I don't want to take up my boss's time. Then I would start looking for, okay, well, what is your boss's objection, or whoever it is that wants to use that product? Why do they want to use that? What are the benefits? What are they excited about? What are they not excited about? And you're trying to do like a kind of discovery with this individual, but for like, what do you think they think? What do you think your boss or the economic decision maker thinks about this? And sometimes that can just jiggle things loose. It shows that you're persistent in helping them try and solve the problem. And I've had cases where I do this and they turn around and they're like, you know what? It's probably just gonna be easier if you have a conversation with them. And if you can just demonstrate that you're genuinely curious and you're not just gonna blah, 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 about my product, then I think you've got a real chance there. And I will say that I've been guilty as anybody of my product, just talking across. I'm so glad we didn't have chorus back in the day when I was selling, because if you looked at my talk times or my splits, it would just be atrocious. You'd be like, Colin. So that's one thing, is just show that you've got to have that good relationship and show the genuine curiosity of trying to understand and show them how complex it can be to really get all the right answers. Because just like Pete said, Pete is the best salesperson at selling what he's doing. And chances are the buyers we're working with, this is probably their first or second, first couple of times that they've encountered this. They're doing something new and they need to talk to somebody about it. And Pete's helped people do something new a whole bunch. And so who best to have that conversation and point them in the right direction but the account exec. So Anita, that's sort of our approach. And Anita is saying, I'm also not the person who would be on the call with the decision maker. So I need to move the board over to our AE with the decision maker. Okay, so yeah, so Alice, let's go back to you in this question. So you've got a call with, basically, it sounds like you're too low in the organization, or maybe you've hit the champion, but you're not at the economic decision maker. Are you going to try and book the champion with Pete, or are you going to try and prospect to the economic decision maker?
It depends. I think sometimes AEs will make a way better job on converting this already champion into pushing a little bit more. So maybe I would book the meeting with the champion and my AE. Other times I could even also prospect into the decision maker and or ask the champion if they both would like to get in the call. But yeah, more often than not would be going for the meeting with the champion and my AE and prospecting to the decision maker separately.
Cool. Yeah, I see how it would work, especially like in the context of like the people that you're prospecting into. I could definitely see how that would make sense, because the deals are huge, and so going to that economic decision maker is probably quite a stretch. So you need to do a little bit of working. In Pete's context, we're talking about Alice, you're talking about 6 to 7 figure deal sizes, right? Is the meetings that you're setting up. Whereas Pete, we're talking 5 to 6 figures. So how would you handle this in sort of the 5 to 6 figure sale from a SDR perspective? Or at least as an AE, what do you want your SDR to do? Do you want them to book you with the champion, or do you want them to book you with or to try and get a referral, or try and go straight to the economic?
Yeah, I think ultimately you'd love to speak directly to a decision maker, but you understand with like booking meetings with outbound is tough. And I know because I was an outbound SDR. Um, and I mentioned Jason who bought me the hat. Well, Jason was great where if I slacked him and said, "Hey, I don't have the decision maker, but I've got a champion, is that cool?" And he'd almost always say yes. So I try to have a similar mindset where I want to are the SDRs who help me make my life so much easier by booking meetings. I want to support them and make their life easier too. So if they've got a champion who's keen and it seems like a good fit, I'm happy to take that conversation because I support the SDR, but also it's my full-time job again to sell this. So if I get a champion, I can do all the heavy lifting around objection handling, around moving up the food chain, getting all the right stakeholders on a call. So I'm happy to take that load because I feel like it falls under my job description, but also because it's supporting the SDR team, which I think is really important because they do so much work to support me, obviously.
Wow, you're so grateful now, but as soon as he gets off, he's not this kind at all. I'm just kidding. Big shout out to Dots, who's 14 minutes behind us and is just answering our questions now. So hello, Dots from the past, future. How does time work? So he liked number 4, but he's saying these are follow-up calls to email sequences. So at the SDR level. So this is in the outreach sequence. Well, we've answered a couple of different questions. And hopefully that gives you some context for how these, how we would handle these. We've got a couple of objections a couple more objections that we're going to get to here. So Dots, when you catch up, let us know if that was helpful. Vlad was saying, what would you say if you received the following objection from a prospect? We've been happy with our setup for 5 years now. It works. No complaints. Why don't we start with Alice?
I would say like the best thing you could start with is something that's straight out of and never split the difference, which would be mirroring. So you could just mirror the last 2 words, no complaints, and that often will get them talking. Um, and after that, you can use something like just labeling what they're thinking. So okay, so it seems like you're very happy with with your vendor, and just trying. You don't really need to tackle and overcome objections. What you want to do is more like trying to understand them and get them talking. So that's like a better way to overcome the objection, I would say.
Very cool. So your secret is not to overcome them at all. It's just use them as more information, label and mirror, and try and keep them going. I love that. Is your last name Voss by chance? You should be a hostage negotiator. Pete, how would you handle that objection? Yeah, I like this, but this sounds interesting, but we're happy with our current setup.
Yeah, that's obviously a broad one, and I feel like there's lots of context to unpack there. So I love Alice's approach of just trying to get them to open up a bit more. Could you repeat the objection? Something came to mind there.
Yeah. Hey, I feel like that's the next one. We're happy with our current setup for the last 5 years. It works, no complaints.
Right. I think you mentioned they at the start of that they said, "Hey, we like what you're pitching. It sounds like an interesting solution, but we're happy with our existing vendor."
Mm-hmm.
I think you could take 2 approaches of like Alice, try to get some more context around, "Oh, no complaints," and see what they come back with, or you could also maybe lean into, "Okay, well, what did you like about the solution?" Because if they mention, "Hey, we like this, but we're already with somebody," say, "What do you like about it?" Because that you'll start to uncover what's most important to them, and you'll maybe get some inklings of pain. They might say, "I like how your solution solves for this," and then you can dive in and say, "Oh, is that something you're struggling with? Like, how does that impact you?" And so you're trying to uncover. Obviously, the toughest thing in sales I find is that most people don't want to undergo big changes. It's kind of the law of inertia. Like if something's kind of working, they just want to stick it out, and rarely do companies seek to make big wholesale changes regularly. So it's very common for people to say, "Hey, we have a solution for this." It's your job to sort of uncover, is the solution just mediocre? Like, are they just getting by? And how much better could things be if they worked with you? And I think in some cases that objection might be true, where they don't need a change of pace or solution, whatever. But it's your job to sort of uncover if there is an opportunity to improve. And the best way to do that is to figure out either the frictions of what they're struggling with, or how life could be better for them. So either diving into what's not so good about your solution now, or you mentioned you liked our solution. Like, what exactly did you like about it?
I love that. Important piece that Pete's that you shared that wasn't maybe as obvious, so I just wanted to highlight it, is the fact that this might not be the right answer, or this might not be a truthful answer. Sometimes this is just a go away. No, we're happy with our current solution. Oh, cool. Tell me about that. Especially if they're saying it's 5 years old and you're selling software. Like, think about what software looked like. Think of what Salesforce looked like 5 years ago compared to Salesforce of today, right? Like, there's a very little chance that the process or what they've done or with their business hasn't evolved in 5 years, unless you're selling into a totally stagnant industry. But that's sort of what I would look at is the first piece is like, is this a real objection, or is this just sort of a go away? Have I got to the meat? And it's like, there is a good chance that they are just happy and they don't need anything. And because not everybody that you talk to is going to be actively ready to buy or even a good fit. They could have they could understand what your product is and they're like, no, I'm just trying to save your time and just saying, hey, no, I'm happy. I've already looked at this, yada, yada, yada. So you need to differentiate. Is this a real objection, or is this a fake one, right? Is this one that I can kind of push past and label and this and that? And I think Alice's approach to exploring and sort of dancing around it, as opposed to trying to run right through it, I think is a really great next step, because you've got to validate and test, like, is this real? Is this not real? What's up, Caesar? Good to see you again. We got some regulars here. We got all the regulars, or almost all the regulars. I like it. All right, so we've got a couple. So the people that just joined us recently, or that might be a little bit behind, we're talking about sort of discovery calls. We had a couple people email us asking for help on specific discovery call scenarios. So we're going to do some screen sharing here. We got a couple of slides where we've got things mapped out. But I want you to, we want to help you in chat as well, not just people that are on the list. So let us know what was the last objection that you received that you were kind of stuck on, or what was or even just tell me, like, what was a fun one? What was one that you had a really fun time handling? So let me know there. And then I think Peter, Alice is going to share their screen and walk us through. We've got a couple of objections here, or we've got a couple of stories here. Stories, some messaging. I think we're starting with actually Anita's. So Anita, so Pete, Alice, do either of you have the slides here? I can't share on, actually, you know what? I can share, but you won't be able to see it. I can drag it into the screen.
That works.
Well, you won't be able to see it though, unless you're both in there. All right, I'll just do that. Cool. So we've got Anita. Perfect. So Anita is the marketing coordinator at WildNote. She's temporarily doing some prospecting, and she's slightly out of her element. She has a lot of experience cold calling because she was self-employed for a couple of decades and in a completely different industry. It's been a while and she needs an upgrade. So there's a niche SaaS company in an emerging industry, so there aren't a lot of benchmarks. Anita, I know you're in chat, so let me know what is it that WildNote does, and I'll do a quick Google search myself. But just, yeah, if you can give me, add some context for me, that'd be super helpful. So often the person we have to have contact with and who would be the end user of our software is not the decision maker, does not hold the purse strings. So they're a mobile, oh, it's right here. I should have read a little bit farther. We provide a mobile app for web app environmental consultants doing field data collection, management, and reporting. So our current target is decision makers, executive VPs, and directors of construction compliance monitoring. This is the target we're trying to get in the deal funnel. All right. So Anita, perfect. It's in C. Thank you. And so basically you're looking for, I guess, how to start the conversations. Are you looking for sort of more along the lines of what to, I think you might have added this in the next one. Perfect. So you've got a bit of a script here. So Pete and Alice, go to the next page there. So let's read Anita's script and I'll try and do it. I won't do it in her voice. I'll do it in my voice because that'd be weird. I don't know what your voice sounds like. So Pete, Alice, we're going to give her some feedback on this opening script and chat. Let me know what your thoughts are. What would you improve? How would you do this differently? Did I make it sound weird? So let's go. Hi, Pete. This is Anita. I'm calling from WildNote. Did I catch you at a bad time? I like it. Great. Thanks for taking my call. I'm just checking in with people who've attended our Lunch and Learn webinars to find out more about the work you do, answer any questions, and see if we can be a benefit. Then I go to okay, so that's the script. Then I go to a playbook to find out how they currently collect data, if they're satisfied, or if they're looking to make a change to a digital workflow. The goal is to sign them up for a demo. If I leave a voicemail, I follow up with the email. This works well for smaller companies. We need to crack the nut of getting through gatekeepers and decision makers in bigger companies. Okay, so there's lots to unpack here. Pete, why don't you take, you know what, let's start with Alice. Let's focus on let's drill into the script here. What do you like? What don't you like? What would you change? And then let's go into, then we can look at the sort of strategy of how would we book a meeting for Anita. So Alice, you're up first.
I like the going straight for the introduction, like who you are and what company from. Did I catch it about time? I love that phrase because it's kind of no oriented, and a prospect always wants to say no at some point. So if you give it from the start, it's good. They're also good having the like some context on it. So thank you for taking my call, and context on why you're calling them. I would just go a little bit more specific on maybe doing 1 minute of research to know who the person is so that you can ask a more specific question at the beginning. So answer any questions and see if we might be of benefit and follow with a question, like a small one. Because I wouldn't know what to say if someone tells me I'm here to answer any questions and see if I can be of benefit. I would say like, I don't have many questions. So like helping them a little bit more to open up with a question, I would say.
Perfect. And Pete, what are your thoughts on the script here?
I like the script. I think I like the sort of the casual tone of, it's not like super salesy. It's, hey, I want to start a conversation with you. I think the opening's strong, as Alice mentioned. The one thing that I may change would be, like we were talking about earlier with outbound calls, like building a little bit of credibility. I might phrase it as saying something like, companies come to us for field data collection and reporting for environmental compliance. So they remember the context of who you are, what you do. And then you can sort of throw them off guard by saying, granted, it's not really a fit for every company, but since you attended our Lunch and Learn webinar, I figured you may appreciate the opportunity to explore the fit further. So now you've shown them, hey, I'm not just here to sell you, I'm here to have a conversation with you to see if there's a good fit. And you've almost thrown them off by, this is a cold call, but I'm not even trying to sell you. I'm trying to see if, I should sell you. I want to see if, we would potentially accept working with you because we're not sure it's a fit. So I think that'll get the conversation going. And right away, it's really clear. They've got context for who you are and how you help. And you're aligning expectations. So you're pulling on the same rope. You're trying to uncover if there's a good fit there. And if so, then it makes sense to have a sales conversation. So that's kind of how I would adjust that sort of second line to entice them to answer a few more qualifying questions.
And before I've got some thoughts here, but when the two of you were cold calling, do you introduce? Are you, hey, this is Colin from Predictable Revenue. Did I catch you at a bad time? Or hey, this is Colin Stewart. Or how do you handle that?
I always go directly. Hi, this is Alicia calling from blank. How are you? Have I caught you in the middle of something? Mm-hmm. And then they go no or yes.
Gotcha. So you're including the company name in there. Pete?
Well, the caveat here is that I was pretty bad at cold calling. Like I didn't book a lot of meetings via cold calling when I was in STR. But nevertheless, I think it kind of depends on who I was selling into. Like if it was someone who I knew was aware of predictable revenue, then I would definitely drop that. Like if for example, if they attended a Lunch and Learn webinar, like Anita's example, then they're probably familiar with the brand. So it's worth saying. If not, I might just lean into, hey, it's Peter Newenberg, and hope that, the conversational friendly tone, they're like, oh, this guy knows me. Or like, I know this guy. I can't remember how, but I know him. So I might try that. It kind of depends the context behind who you're calling.
That's fair. I think in this context, I'm with you. I'd probably drop the company name because you're mentioning that you attended a Lunch and Learn.
Mm-hmm.
My question for Anita is: this is an amazing list to be working. Like I know we do a bunch of webinars and lunch and learns and things like that, and our SDRs always find that they're great lists and great places to book meetings from. I'm curious, what information do you have about their attendance? Like, did they attend? Did they not attend? Did they engage? Did they ask for slides? Like, was there any follow-ups? Was there any questions that didn't get answered? They're usually chat logs. Like if it's Zoom, you can get a chat log from whoever. You could always rewatch it, but it's kind of a pain to do that. So the chat logs are helpful if they show, didn't show, if a bunch of people asked for the slides. There's so many of these things that you can kind of anchor your messaging on. So I love the approach that Pete and Alice have. I wouldn't change anything. Another thing to test is just if they were, just maybe weaving in some of that context. You know, saw that you were on our XYZ webinar, and I know I don't have the chat logs, or I wasn't paying attention to chat, but I know a bunch of people reached out looking for the slides, so I just wanted to share, what's the best way to reach you, and then use that to start a conversation. And Anita is only calling people who attended. We run everything in HubSpot, and it sends out thank yous and swag. Cool. So yeah, I mean, you can follow up to confirm, hey, we're sending out some swag. Do I have your mailing address? Correct. And that's your start of the conversation. It's kind of a tricky one. And then you could sort of transition from like, I just want to confirm your address. Perfect. Okay. Swag's on the way. By the way, did you have any questions? Did it unlock anything for you? Like, how did you feel about XYZ? It's all these opportunities. Again, I like Alice and Pete's approach better. Their initial approach, I think, makes a ton of sense. I'm just trying to throw out some additional things to try, because the one thing we can guarantee is that we don't have full context, and that there are no silver bullets. So we just got to test. As we're going through this, if you've got a situation, or if you've got some messaging you want us to have a look at, shoot it to Marisol. She'll throw her email in chat shortly, or just throw the message in chat, and we'll copy paste it in here. Perfect. And we'll throw you into the slides next. All right, so that was Anita. Coming up next, we have Marianne. She's the co-founder at Belgian House. And she's a brand agency working with Belgian design businesses for interior and concept stores. We'd like to know how to get in contact and approach retailers like Simmons and Indigo. Perfect. And Marisol's email is in chat. We call her Maro, in case you're ever wondering, or in case I say, hey, send it to Maro. That's Marisol. We're just lazy. Marisol is just too many letters. So Alice, why don't we start off here? So let's say you're an SDR working for Marianne at the Belgian House. It's a brand agency for interior design for concept stores. And so you're trying to get in touch with, say, Indigo. Where do you start an equation for something like this?
So first, after you have the right contacts, retail right now is getting a big blow with the pandemic. So you gotta be very mindful about that and approach them acknowledging the situation, that they might be closing stores. It might be a hard time. So you can say something like, these are really tough times. I understand if maybe this is not a time to explore new initiatives, but like always be very mindful you're human before anything else. And in these kinds of enterprises, because they are so big, I would say try to go for the highest executives and have like a top-down referral. I say that will work.
Perfect. I'm going to throw it to Pete. I'm going to step away for just 1 minute, but I'm going to throw it to Pete, and I'll be back. And then I see Lydia's got a question, so we'll get to that once we get through this messaging.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think there's a lot to do to start with approaching, retailers like Indigo. Like, first and foremost, figure out which personas are relevant. So based on what you sell, like what type of job titles at a company like Indigo might care about this? Like, who do you think is the decision maker? And to Alice's point, if you don't know, then aim high and try to get referred down to the right person. So a call to action like, could you point me in the direction of the person who oversees your design or something of those lines. Like try to get filtered to the right person, because at really big companies, you won't always be able to know ahead of time who the decision maker is. So if you can go to them and get help pointed in the right direction, then you'll know that you're connecting with the right person after that. And you also have the sort of the powerful weight of being able to email or message that person and say, hey, I spoke to your boss and they pointed me in your direction. So now it's, I know if Colin emailed me and said, hey, you should chat with this person, I would probably take it pretty seriously. So the top-down referral can be a really good method. From there, I think once you kind of know who you're reaching out to, based on the bandwidth you've got available, like try different approaches from sending emails if you can get the email, cold calling if you can get the phone number. But if you don't have access to that kind of information, because you don't have like list building tools or things like that, LinkedIn is like a public resource of, every business person in the world basically, and you can connect with them right directly there. So if you can't get access to emails or cold calling or phone numbers, pardon me, give LinkedIn a go and try to map out an organization and start connecting with people and trying to get filtered to the right person.
Perfect. I am back. I don't know which direction you took it. I think the piece that I would go for, just sort of building on what Alice had mentioned earlier, the retail space is in a awkward spot right now where it's undergoing a bit of a shift, right? The normal that existed 9-10 months ago, or I guess 10 months ago now, is totally different. And so in some ways, it's not a great industry to be to prospecting into. In other ways, it could be a great industry because like we talked about earlier, people don't just do things just because they want to. They do things because they're trying to adapt, because they're trying to hit a goal. So if you can find a way to align yourself with that, then like align yourself with like helping them achieve that sort of that outcome. Oh, and you're saying, oh, interior, like home furnishings and couches and sofas. Yes, she's okay. So you're selling to those companies, which they are going particularly well. So, maybe we're playing to the other end. As I will illustrate, my buddy sent me this beautiful chair the other day because he owed me some money. And I was like, well, I'd rather just have a nice chair. And he owns, his family owns 6 or 7 furniture stores. Shout out to Scan Designs for all you Vancouver people. Yeah, and I've been having conversations with him through the pandemic, and it's been super weird. They shut down one of their stores, and they had to, and like sales increased in all of their other stores. People were they're really investing in furniture right now. And so I'm curious, like there's got to be a way so if the industry is doing really well, how can you help sort of align yourselves with where it's going, right? Are they changing up the way that they are organizing their stores, right? Like if you're doing concept stores, what's different? And I think this is the sort of, I guess, the strategy to the outreach. Like this is why I'm reaching out. This is your product market fit, really, right? Is like what's the gap in their life, right? Like, and if you can think through or talk to your last couple of customers, find out what the gap was in their life, and then try and build your messaging around them. But I think Pete and Alice sort of covered the tactics of, LinkedIn, email, etc. It seems like if you're going to retail, phone is going to be, if you're calling retail stores and you're trying to find the owner, everybody at a retail store is going to pick up the phone, but you're not necessarily going to get to the owner. But if you are going to stores that are like 6 to 8, chances are they can pass you through the phone line. So, phone might be one of those ones where it's probably one of those ones where you're going to get 100% pickup rate, but you may have a tough time getting through gatekeepers. Dots is catching up. He's saying, yes, thank you so much. I don't remember the question that we asked you, but you're very welcome anyway. So Marianne, let me know, was that helpful? Is there anything else any other context that we need? And we'll come back to that if there's anything that we missed. Coming up next, we have, I didn't change it on that screen. Charles Jelena. I'm assuming it's Jelena, just because famous, was he Canadian? Pete? Martin Jelena, the hockey player, Canadian hockey player, played for the Canucks and the Flames. As you will hear, there's a hockey themed podcast today, or podcast live stream. So Charles, let us know, are you any relation to the famous hockey player? They specialize in DAS, DAAS, database as a service, I'm going to guess, and make sure to, and they help make the transition to cloud simple and seamless. So he's aiming his sales calls, emails at software companies and outsourcing companies at the moment. They're a cloud services provider. And so let's talk strategy here. We don't have a script to go off of. Pete, why don't we start with you? Where would you, so if you're selling database as a service, we're probably, and if we're selling into software companies, maybe I'll set the context here. So let's say we're just selling into software companies, database as a service, that help them transition to cloud. So I'm going to infer that we're probably going after more established companies, because I think any software company that's founded in the last 8 to 10 years probably doesn't have large like Oracle databases or, that sort of like on-premise approach. The chances are they are SaaS businesses. So I'm going to make the assumption that you're looking at older businesses that might be using like like an AS400, like some old IBM stuff. Charles, let us know in chat. Are we on the right track here? And then I'll pass it to Pete. So what would your approach be for a vertical like this as an SDR?
Well, I think first and foremost, similar to what I mentioned on the last example, would be shape out your personas. Like it's, one thing to say, hey, I'm going after these particular companies, but there's probably, especially like Colin said, if they're older or slightly bigger companies, probably 5 or 6 or 7 people who might be responsible or care about this kind of decision. So take some time to think about each individual persona, and try to figure out what's important to that persona. So what are maybe their goals, their responsibilities in their job? What are the pain points and frictions that they're experiencing? And a great example that Kenny, a former employee here, used when he'd look up job titles. So if you're, let's say in my shoes, I typically sell to a VP of sales, look up, job boards, like who's hiring for, maybe you won't find a VP of sales, but who's hiring for a similar title that you're pursuing, and what are the listed responsibilities and goals and requirements of that job, because that's a really good idea of the person you're selling to, what they might care about or be responsible for. So I would say take a minute first to flesh out personas and craft unique messaging based on what you think each persona cares about. And that's how I would launch in and break into an organization, as unique messaging for each persona, so that you can achieve as much relevance as possible.
Love that. Alice, how would you build on what Pete said there?
I agree with everything, and I would add to make sure that your pitch is very easy to understand. Like if you would have called your grandma and explained what you do, then you're on the right track, because cloud platform and cloud services, there wouldn't be any more like a value proposition because there's so much out there. And like the important thing here is what the results are and what are your unique approach. So making sure that that comes across in your pitch, that would be like a very important area to focus on, I would say. And some people, mostly in people in software companies, tend to be on the lookout for emerging tech. Maybe not in very old established companies, but there must be someone there. So you can play like the Intel card. So like saying, it's always useful to know what's out there data and technology wise. So if they don't really want to take the meeting to buy anything else, you can just say like, you might benefit from some intel on what's new in the market. And I think that.
Cool. I'm going to double down on Pete's comment here. I'm going to channel my inner Kenny. I'm just going to pull up, you all won't be able to see this, or Pete and Alice won't be able to see this, but people in YouTube can see this. This is a presentation I did with Kenny at SaaStock. And basically it's talking about sort of our market fit methodology. And I've got a link to a slide, or you can get the links to the slides if you want. Just drop Mero an email, or just type a 1 in chat if you want these slides. There's like, I think 60 or 70 of them. But this is the important piece. And so if you are watching Charles, this is how Pete said to build your segmentation, this is how I would do it. And you can start at the sort of high level and say the targeting, the need, and the messaging hypothesis, or you can break it down by each one of these. And what I mean by targeting is basically who you're going after, like how you define who you're going after. And that's from a company level. So like, what are the company firmographics, demographics, companies, demographics. Anyway, so what is the size and, revenue, number of employees, vertical, et cetera. What is the persona? So like, what is the job titles? What is the job level? And then you're sort of bridging that with the responsibility. So this is where Pete was saying, go look up the job descriptions, go look up job postings, because you can start to understand what the responsibilities of these individuals are. Right. And that's that makes up your targeting hypothesis. And generally you want to call it a hypothesis because you're not sure if, like, we want to confirm that with sort of testing that these are the right ways of, you might have this market that you understand, but you may not have the right way of sort of expressing that in a list. Or you might have the right company, the right person, but you're barking up the wrong responsibility tree. Right. And so that's the targeting hypothesis. And the responsibility, like what they're responsible for, feeds into the message or into that need hypothesis. And so it's the connecting piece that's going to show you that this is why this is the thing that's missing in their life. This is the reason why you need to do something. And so when you take that responsibility of, like, what are they responsible for as a human within an organization, right? If we're playing on the I'm just going to assume you're selling into CTOs and somebody interested in buying a database as a service. And let me know if DAAS stands for database as a service. Excuse me. The CTO is probably responsible for the tech stack. They're probably responsible for the product development, the engineering team, right? And so if we look at, okay, well, as somebody who's responsible for the entire engineering team and the output of that engineering team, what are their goals this year? Right? So like, what are their KPIs that are going to spawn from those responsibilities? All right. And this is where we're kind of putting that into the context of, well, what is it that their organization is trying to achieve? All right. What does the organization try to achieve? And what is the chunk that this individual is what is the progress they're trying to make in order to do that? And that's how you define the goal. And it's typically like a number that's related to the responsibility and is tied into the overall goal of the company. And so like, what is that KPI? Right. And so if we look at, Charles's example here, I keep wanting to call him Martin, but this is not a Canadian hockey show. So we'll go with Charles. So if we look at the CTOs, they're going to be responsible for, let's say, the tech stack, right? And maybe they're doing a cloud, like a transition to cloud services, right? They're trying to implement like a Dropbox or like a Box or a Google Drive or something like that. And so specifically, that could be one of their key thrusts, is they're trying to get their digital file storage, online and out of like a Microsoft SharePoint, right? That could be a very specific thing, but that's probably you maybe even getting too deep into the details. And then if we look at like, what is the job to be done? So if we say the goal is they want all their files to be available online and outside the firewall, so like their people don't have to log into SharePoint. And they don't have to, use a VPN or any of this complexity. They just want it to be like a single, like, not OAuth. Anyway, one click to sort of log in and all their files are there. That's the goal. And then the job to be done is to find a system that can help me achieve that, right? And the obstacles or friction is, well, it has to work with our current, tech stack. Our team is in, X number of different countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And these are all pieces that are going to help you formulate their need, which you can confirm on the call when you actually do set up these calls. But they're also the goal, the job to be done, the obstacles and friction. These are the setup for how you're going to describe your product and service, or the progress that you can help them make. Right. And the more that you know all of these pieces, which I think is what Pete was alluding to, the more you know all of these, the better you can do. The better you'll be able to understand your customers, and the more you're going to handle your the follow-up conversations. So if you're curious on this methodology, if you want to see more, you can go to predictablerevenue.com/matrix. But before you do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. because this is super valuable stuff and we're giving it away for free. So the least you can do is like that, it's not that hard. So if that's helpful, let me know. And yeah, I think we're coming to the last of the questions here. I think that's all we have. And I know Alice and Pete have other commitments that they wanted to make it to. And I'm sure all of you do as well. So if you want the slides to that webinar, you can head over to, or just email Mero, or type a 1 in chat and we'll get them to you. If you want just the matrix itself, you can go to predictablerevenue.com/matrix. And you can actually get the Google Doc that I think it's like a Google sheet that we use when we're working with our clients. We sort of fill all that stuff in. So let me know how we can be helpful there. Alice, Pete, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for hanging out with us today. I know it's time out of your busy days, and I really appreciate you taking some of your time.
That was lots of fun, Colin. Thanks for having us, and thanks for all the listeners.
Yeah, thanks to everybody that hung out. Thanks, and thanks, Alice. I think I cut you off. You were just saying something.
No, just thank you for having us.
Pete, I'm curious. I know you, like Sarah, you're also a musician. I know you have some songs that are out on Spotify recently. Mind if we play one on the way out, or are the rights, is your publisher going to come after us?
I don't mind at all. I'm probably going to leave for that because that sounds pretty awkward. Also, not all my music is really family friendly, so I'll leave it in your discretion, Colin.
What's a family friendly one? Uber in Vancouver?
That is a classic. Maybe if you look up Andrea Klut's new song.
Andrea Klut's. All right, let me pull up my Slack. And if you want to hang out and listen to some of Pete's sweet, sweet jams, I'll pull that up. There we go. And then there we go. Pete will awkwardly slide away into the sunset while we listen to Andrea Klut's new song. What's the song? Young?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to play us out. And Pete, what did you do for this song?
Produced it. Yeah. So made basically the instrumentation behind it.
Nice. Yeah, basically everything. And if you've seen the nice mic that Sarah uses for On Your Growth, that makes all of us jealous and makes her voice sound amazing. It's one of Pete's. They got a full music setup that I'm quite jealous of. It's fantastic. So thanks so much for joining us. And if you're looking for if you like the music, I'll throw a link in the chat so you can check that out. But thanks to Pete and Alice for hanging out today.
See everybody. Bye.
See ya. All right, let me know if you can hear this. I don't want to make it too loud in your ears.
Remembering the summer day, the way the sun kisses your face. We could spend hours talking for hours until golden hour. Only our parents wondered about us. But that's when we were younger. Feelings go now that we're older. Slipping through, can't see what I'm holding. Moving past, just trying to get closer to you, to you. A little bit nervous, I'm bleeding on purpose. Untie me from my mind, a little uncertain, scratching the surface. Untie me from my mind, a little bit nervous, I'm bleeding on purpose. Untie me from my mind, a little uncertain, scratching the surface. Untie me from my mind, rosy cheeks on a winter's day. Innocent till I met heartbreak. We thought we had hours, we turned into minutes, and left us with seconds. Does anyone ever wonder about us? Wishing I was young. on purpose. Untie me from my mind, a little uncertain, scratching the surface. Untie me from my mind, a little bit nervous, I'm bleeding on purpose. Untie me from my mind, a little uncertain, scratching the surface. Untie me from my mind. Spend all my time looking over my shoulder. Just a child, I didn't know better. Honey, relax, there's no time for later. But that's when we were younger. Feelings gone now that we're older. Zipping through, can see what I'm holding. Moving fast, just trying to get further. A little bit nervous, I'm bleeding on purpose. Untie me from my mind, a little uncertain, scratching the surface. Untie me from my mind, a little bit nervous, I'm bleeding on purpose. Untie me from my mind, a little uncertain.
All right, that's all we have. Thanks for hanging out. Listen to that awesome, awesome song. If you liked it, make sure you hit the like button, and I put a link to the Spotify in chat. That was Andrea Clute, and Pete produced that one. Anyway, thanks for hanging out today, and I'll see you all next week. Bye now.